Shabbat Shalom. I'm Natalie. My name's Natalie Semmel. I'm a junior here. I'm in Davenport College, and I major in film and media studies. And today I have the joy of talking to the amazing Loeb, Gendler, Szabó family. I'm first going to introduce all of our amazing panelists here. I think maybe we can go Hannah through Mary. So Hannah Gendler Szabó is a junior at Yale and Culinary College. She double majors in comparative literature and computing and linguistics, which computing and linguistics, very, very cool new major. She attended URJ Eisner Camp for 8 summers and was the first openly transgender person to attend an American religious sleepaway camp in the cabin of their elders. This semester, she is one of the Jewish Women's Conference interns and has been especially involved in planning Thursday and Friday's panel events. On campus, Hannah also serves as editor-in-chief of the Yale Historical Review and managing editor of the Yale Herald. Tamar Gendler, who's Pearson class of '87, is the Dean of Faculty of Arts and Sciences, the Vincent J. Scully Professor of Philosophy, and Professor of Psychology and Cognitive Science at Yale University. Tamar also has a really long resume in Jewish summer camps. Tamar attended Eisner Camp from 1975 to 1978, Kutz in 1980, and Pardes in Jerusalem in 1992. And finally, we have Mary Loeb Gendler, who is a longtime member of social justice and Jewish feminist movements. Her activism and passion took her and her husband, Rabbi Everett Gendler, to Selma, Alabama, where they marched alongside Martin Luther King Jr. and Dharamsala, India, where they supported the Tibetan community in exile through education on nonviolent protest strategies. Mary Gendler has been instrumental in the creation of new Jewish rituals that recognize and celebrate the female experience, such as ceremonies for menstruation and menopause. A clinical psychologist by training, Mary served as the director of the Jewish Family and Children's Services in Merrimack Valley in Massachusetts until her retirement in 1995, and she is also a brilliant organic gardener. So I think the way I want to start this panel is by asking all three of you a question about how your understanding of Jewish womanhood has shifted over the course of your lifetime. And maybe we can start with Mary for this question.
It's changed quite a bit. A little louder. Okay. Yeah, it's changed quite a bit. I'll do a little history. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, which most people have not heard of, but it's in the middle of the country. And my family was reform. You all may not, it may not even exist that much now, but it meant that forbidden, thou shalt not wear a kippah, thou shalt not wear a talit, thou shalt not speak Hebrew, thou cannot have thy marriage in a temple because thou cannot put a chuppah on the altar.
Thou shalt not break a glass.
I will tell you why I am so astounded at that. When I married my husband, Everett Gendler, and he had been at the seminary.
At JTS.
At JTS. And I can't believe you just said that, because you know how there's a negotiation between the men in villages, and you know how much is the girl going to get and how much is the family. Everett and my father sat there talking about what rituals could be in the marriage ceremony, and Everett got everything except breaking the glass. That's really weird. Wow. What was it? How has it changed? Okay, so I grew up in this ultra reform, which meant I did not learn Hebrew. I did go to Sunday school, and I was confirmed when I was 15, and that was the equivalent of well, not the equivalent of bar mitzvah, but that's what we got. We got the confirmation. And the other thing that I got from my particular temple, we had a rabbi who was very, very active in the community and in taking down these bad businesses and he was just always out there with social justice things, and that was wonderful. And I didn't think much about being a Jewish woman except that I went to a private girls' school, and we didn't have prep schools in the Midwest, but a private girls' school. And it wasn't until I was about 6th or 7th grade when I started noticing that there were 2 Jews per class. Only 2 Jews per class. And that was, and nobody ever talked about it, nobody ever said it. And the only time I had anything about being Jewish there was one girl who I'm afraid was not very popular, and was having a luncheon in a place that would not allow Jews in. I mean, when I look back, it's hard for me to believe that this is what's happening in my lifetime. And nobody much liked this girl anyway, so they all said they weren't going because I couldn't go. So that was sort of my experience growing up with that. Otherwise, I wasn't very involved religiously, and I mean, I knew I was Jewish, but that was sort of it. And but as I say, I married a rabbi, which was really a surprise to me. I had not been out with any Jewish men before, but it just happened. And he was conservative, and so all of a sudden there were these, Jewish things that people did, and I didn't know about it. And thank God he was vegetarian, because with my background, I think we could not have gotten married if I'd had to keep kosher. It just made no sense to me. It was just too irrational for me. And my mother-in-law told me that. I knew the first time I went to see her, I used the wrong fork, and she said, "Don't worry about it, we'll bury it." And so I always look forward to visiting with her. So I began to know about Jewish rituals. And I'll talk more about this later, but my involvement with Jewish rituals and with women's place in Judaism started around the time that Tamar was born. First of all, I came across the other day something that I had written to her about her bat mitzvah. And of course I didn't have a bat mitzvah, but what was amazing was that I was totally into it. And I'd sort of forgotten that, but this was just it. And that's what we talked about, and that's what we did, and it was such an important thing. And I only realized that I guess that was partly my being involved in that, or my being bat mitzvah, but not really. So, around that time, around 1970, as I said, I was married to this rabbi, and I had been a very independent person, and I bopped around Europe for 2 years on my own, and then all of a sudden I find myself, I have a husband, I have 2 children, I've never cooked before, I couldn't even bake a potato. So all of a sudden it was like, who am I? I have no idea who I am. I am in this house and I'm taking care of these 2 little kids. And when I want my husband to babysit, I have to cook dinner and get somebody else in the house to help him babysit, all of that. All of that. So what really brought me through all of that is I started getting interested in women and Judaism and women's role and the whatever things you had for that. And that, I'll say more about that, but that really brought me into that because I started looking at historical women and Lilith and Vashti and all of these things that I had never heard about before. And so, to make a long story short, it really brought me into the world and helped me discover who I was. I had never spoken before a group before. I mean, I would have just freaked if I had been in here right at the beginning because I wouldn't have known how to talk. So I'll get around to some of the rituals and articles that I wrote, but how the women have changed, it's just unbelievable. I couldn't even think why. I didn't know why you were interested in this, Hannah. I had no idea. I thought everything had been done. But I guess not. Okay.
Tamar, how has your understanding?
So this was my mom, right? The stories that you're hearing of her coming to consciousness of her feminism and of rituals that can be associated with things like menstruation were associated with the time of her parenting of me as a pre-adolescent and then adolescent. So the joy of growing up with somebody who is coming to feminist consciousness at a moment where the world has not yet come to feminist consciousness is the joy of learning that conformity is not available to you given the household in which you live. So we had so many sources of profound embarrassment as a result of growing up in this family. Everybody else ate store-bought white bread. We grew our own food, or even more embarrassingly, as my father used to say, helped food grow. We had a front yard that was cover cropped with buckwheat. They were crocheted Loeb wool ponchos to our May Day Lag BaOmer ceremony, which only 1970s New England counterculture could bring you, where we danced around a traditional British maypole in honor of Lag BaOmer.
And little did we know it was the Asherah, but
my parents used to mortify me by using non-masculine pronouns for God in the early 1970s. So all of the things that were consciousness raising for Mary were, in a really interesting way, sources of both inspiration and embarrassment for me. That is, they were just complete markers of difference. Everybody else had a television set. We basically got one to watch Nixon resign. So there were so many features of what, in retrospect, I realized were a kind of bravery, where I was just, everybody else dressed up as Esther for Purim, and I was Vashti, right? I was named Tamar in a semi-feminist gesture of reclaiming that story. At least my sister got Naomi, which is a nice, normal name. So I had a pretty complicated relationship that direction, and then when I came and had my own family, and Hannah's father Zoltan is also here, we had 2 children whom we named Laszlo and Jonah, and we were for a period of time raising a family in which we did not expect to have a bat mitzvah. Hannah, by the age of 3, was already clear about her gender identity, but it took another 6 years for her to transition formally, in part because she went to Eisner camp, living on Boys' Side, and she didn't want not to be able to go back to camp. When she finally transitioned with the help of Edith Klein from Teshet and moved on to Girls' Side, she was incredibly warmly welcomed by Mishkan Israel, the congregation to which we belong, which we discovered only a decade after we had joined, was founded by Mary's great times 8 grandparents. We are Haller Mandelbaums, which we did not know, so we had gone every year to the Mishkan Israel Cemetery with the kids, visited the Haller Mandelbaum grave, and then discovered that it was founded by Mary Haller Mandelbaum, Loeb, Gendler, ancestrally. And so I have had the experience of being the child of an extraordinary Jewish woman and the mother of an extraordinary Jewish woman, to whom I will now hand things.
So I've been alive for less long than the 2 of them, but I've still had more than enough time to be embarrassed by both generations of my family. On that note, I'm going to try to get us back to Natalie's question of and I think that even in the 21 years of my life, my thoughts about Judaism and womanhood and Jewish womanhood have certainly changed a lot. I mean, I grew up sort of living under the kind of countercultural backlash of Tamar, with a very, more traditional sense of Judaism. I remember for 1 year we tried doing compost in our backyard in Hamden and quickly gave up. We would light Shabbat candles and they wouldn't be hand-rolled beeswax, they would be, from the store. So I grew up, but of course also grew up spending a lot of time with both of my grandparents. And so already from a very young age had a sense of, a very kind of weird sense of the trajectory of Judaism across my family, because in some sense the older version of Judaism was this one that was very tied up in the organic movement and the feminist movement. And I remember being in my grandparents' library and seeing, very traditional like Talmudic texts next to the newest kind of feminist erotica, and these being kind of things that were being put in conversation. And that to me like really was already from a very young age what Judaism was and what it was about. So I didn't have haven't yet had this same sort of response to or turning away from the Judaism I was sort of born into, because I think I was already born into this Judaism that was such a kind of cacophony of voices in a really exciting way. And I think because of that, like, coming into my own place as a Jewish woman was really something that, as my mom mentioned, was to some extent shaped by Jewish faces, by places like Eisner, where in more traditional Jewish spaces I encountered gender binaries for the first time that I hadn't really experienced at my very progressive New Haven elementary school. And I, encountered the realities of what it is to kind of grow up and become an adult, and the physical realities of that through Jewish rituals and conversations about these kinds of things. So I think the more traditional side of Judaism was really something that was very important for my own identity building. And it's been really interesting to kind of chart my own path through Jewish feminism and always encounter back on many of the things, to go full circle, that Mary was thinking about 50 or 60 years ago. So
At least.
yeah.
And Hannah, can I ask a little bit more about what returning to Eisner was like, and how you look back on that moment from your perspective now?
Yeah, it was really, I remember just being, wondering why, for example, it was such an emotional experience for my mom. Because for me, it was just like, I was very glad that it had happened. I don't think I entirely had a sense of how uncertain and how surprising it was that I was able to return to camp 11 years ago, when on one hand, trans youth did not have the same kind of controversy and national press around them, but on the other hand, that also meant they were less known. So in letters that we were sending to Eisner families, we were explaining what it was to be trans, right? These were just terms that had really only started to be kind of viewed as not just kind of abstract concepts, but things that real, people in communities were. And returning to Eisner was interesting because the Eisner I returned to was different. We went from calling the sides of camp boys' side and girls' side to emet and chesed. We just chose Jewish words, Hebrew words, and there was kind of some changes in some of the more gendered rituals that we went through. There was still, each side of camp did Kabbalat Shabbat on their own before joining together, and I felt a little bit like an insider because I had experienced both. It was kind of cool, but really I just remember it felt so much more normal. I was already presenting in very feminine ways before I formally transitioned, and I think it was in some ways a lot harder for camp to have someone living on boys' side who needed to get their hair in French braids before Shabbat, and would have to meet one of her friends in the middle of camp while everyone was getting ready because, what else was I going to do with my gorgeous long hair? And so I think in some ways it was like it really felt like returning into a space that I belonged to even more. And I think, I loved being at Eisner for those next 5 years. It was really impactful and meaningful for my Judaism.
Tamar,
One thing I remember, there were twins, a girl and a boy, and she had been in the boys' home, and he was very upset that she was moving to her sister's.
Tamar, do you have any memories of this time that you want to share?
Absolutely. And I want to also point out Zoltan, who was very much present with us throughout this. So we were helped in this process by Edith Klein from Keshet. And I still remember the letter that we composed with Edith's help that we sent to all of the Eisner parents. Remember, Hannah had been a famous figure at Eisner because she was the snail with the mail who delivers without fail in Frog and Toad when she was in Bonin, which meant that everybody at camp knew exactly who she was because the snail without fail, through rain or sleet or snow, was really a camp celebrity. So really, and everybody had known her on boys' side. When she was a boys' side camper, she dressed for Shabbat in her Shabbat best, which often included a skirt. She did have her hair French, but you didn't wear skirts till.
That was the rule.
The rule
for
was.
myself.
Oh, your
No
rule
skirts.
for yourself was no skirts till you moved to girls' side, but you had your hair French braided. So it had been a very, very complicated space for Hannah. We reached out to Edith for her help, and the letter that Edith helped us write included the following sentence. Like other girls her age, Hannah is private about the way that her body is different from those of her friends. And that was the sentence that we included in the letter to the parents. And we went to Eisner a day early when Hannah was going back to figure out how showering would work. And the arrangement was she was living in the girls' bunk, but the first year her showering was going to be in the counselors' section. And we had allotted a whole day to do the orientation. It took 5 minutes. Her counselor said, welcome. And then we went and had bagels at the Berkshire Bagelry because we didn't need to spend any more time with Hannah. The astounding thing with the parents is we sent out this letter. Remember, this is 12 years ago. Really, nobody was outside of small academic circles aware of the ways in which gender identity and bodies might mismatch. We sent this letter, like other girls her age, Hannah Dada. Every single family that the letter went to requested that Hannah be in their daughter's bunk. We had absolute zero Eisner families request that their daughter not be in the bunk with Hannah, and so she went to Eisner and was there for the next 5 years very, very happily on girls' side. So I remember it as just an extraordinary moment. I want to give great credit to Louis Boardman, who came up to New Haven to talk to you, Hannah. Do you remember that? Just to see what it was like to be with you post-transition, and to Herb Brockman at Michigan Israel, and to the team at Cold Spring School. We did all 3 of the transitions with the same set of letters, and we had 3 extraordinarily supportive communities.
I think maybe we can go back in time a little bit, and Mary, I'm so curious in learning more. You kind of hinted at this when you were introducing some things. I want to learn more about your writings about new Jewish rituals specifically for women.
Okay, well, yes. There are several, 2 of which are going to totally embarrass my children and grandchildren. One, the most interesting was, I was struck by the fact that circumcision makes boys a member of the community. I forget the right word, but and that there was a leader of the community, and there was nothing available for girls. So I started thinking about this, and what is so powerful about circumcision? Well, one of the things is there's blood. There's no comparable ritual for girls, which means that you cannot be as much of a leading community as can males. And the other thing that I read about was that circumcision is practiced all around the world, all different religions, all different kind of cultures, that it is a very, very basic thing. So I proposed and wrote up a ritual which I called Sarah's Seed. And what I proposed was that on the 8th day of a girl, there be a ritual breaking of the hymen. And this freaked everybody out. we had a friend, Lady Kelman, I don't know if you know him, but he was at some countercultural gathering that I didn't go to, and he came back and he said, Mary, everybody's talking about, they're saying, hide your baby daughters, here comes Mary Gendler. Now, I have to say, I did not do this with my own children, and I'm not sure that it was ever done, but I think it pointed to something important, that, if the males are the only ones up here who could be, up at this level, and there's nothing available for women, that is very important. I wrote articles about Lilith and Vashti. It may have been the original articles, I don't know, in Response magazine, and I sort of discovered Lilith, and she was just amazing. And so then I wrote something called The First Divorce between Adam and Lilith. And then I had another ritual that I proposed, which absolutely horrified Tamar. And it really was nothing compared to the first. It was just that I made in silver, I made a little woman like this, and I put a red dot on the end of it.
A bead, coral bead.
Right, coral bead.
I remember.
To signify menstruation. And I told Tamar about it. She was horrified. No, Mom, please, no. And so I didn't. So some of my suggestions were not in great favor with my family. Then I went on to write about other Jewish women. And what was important about all of this for me was that it was my way into the world, back into the world. And I can remember the first time I spoke before a group of, I didn't know what to say. But it sort of brought me out, and I remember one time, this is sort of fun, that I was talking to a group of old ladies, and I walked in and I said, oh God, it's gonna be like. Anyway, they were so fascinated and so interested. And now I'm one of them, but it was just sort of an amazing thing to get out there and find that I could meet people, I could talk to people, so that was very good. And as I say, I wrote an article about Vashti, and I can't remember what else right now, but they were very important. I don't think anything has been of mine has been brought into the broader Jewish community, but I think that what I think it was hopefully instructive in terms of people learning about women. And I also read about in ancient times the female goddess worship, the Asherah. I don't know whether any of you know of that, but there was goddess worship in Judaism way back then. So that's a few things.
Yeah, and obviously this differs so much from your childhood in the Midwest,
yes.
with the synagogue that you were members
yes.
of. So what was it like, both kind of making this transition, but also choosing to raise Tamar in a different way? And then I guess as a follow-up, Tamar, what was it like choosing to raise Hannah in a different way from the way you were raised?
Well, I mean, first of all, I was raised in such reformed context, which actually people who are more traditional, I have a friend and she says, how are you Jewish? You weren't even Jewish. And I said, actually, I felt very Jewish, and we were more onto the side of social justice and doing things in the world. And so that was sort of, and my rabbi would stand up in a big black coat and his gray hair pushed back, and he'd be giving these sermons about this company and that company and whatever. So, but Tamar was raised much more Jewishly. I mean, first of all, I married a rabbi. I can't say how she would have been raised had I married another, person more from my background. But Everett was very very Jewish. He liked all sorts of rituals, and so Tamar was raised in a totally different kind of atmosphere. And I mean, we had Friday night dinners, and we went to temple, and so she was raised totally different. And she had a bat mitzvah, and between the time, I mean, I think it was like 15 years of when I started, and nobody'd even heard of anything for children, young girls. And then there she was having a bat mitzvah at 13. So she was raised quite differently, and much more involved in Jewish traditions and Jewish life.
Yeah, so Hannah was raised in a family with two Jewish parents, but her Jewish father came from Budapest and had not been raised with any religious tradition. So we depended on the beauty of Jewish summer camp to give Hannah the kind of ritual experience that we didn't have at home. I would say both our children, Hannah and her brother Lasse, were raised with real Jewish identity. But most of the ritual experiences they had, Pesach and the other holidays, were done still with Mary and Everett. So in some sense, your generation of practice, we lived only 2 hours apart, so we were able to go up for holidays. And I would say, I don't know how ritually rich you feel like your childhood was.
Yeah, I mean, I think the majority of it was in Great Barrington. We would always go up for Pesach, and for various other holidays.
Everything in Great Barrington with Everett was a ceremony. So
yeah.
We had a Thanksgiving Seder, which involved a beautiful set of readings from Native American poetry that Everett had put together in the 70s, and a whole set of rituals and practices. We had a Tu B'Shvat Seder. There was no shortage of Seders in Great Barrington.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. And I think I didn't really have a sense, because that was the way, I mean, through my grandparents and through Eisner, which is not quite as focused on Judaism's relation with nature as Mary and Everett, but still certainly has that side of things. I think I was raised really thinking that's what Judaism was, and of course it is what Judaism is, but I think it really actually was when I entered more traditional Jewish spaces and multi-denominational spaces that I realized how unique the kind of set of rituals I had grown up with were.
Hannah, do you have a favorite Great Barrington memory?
Ooh, of anything, of a ritual?
Of a ritual, yeah.
I will definitely say rolling beeswax candles before Shabbat with my grandfather was always really special. My mom and I were just back up in Great Barrington a couple weeks ago, and we found the old beeswax sheets, and he had a very, intricate set of rituals that came before and after the rolling of these candles, many of which might be lost or might lie deep within the memories of one of these two women. And that was always really special. But I also remember that that Everett and Mary put together this gorgeous tree house for us that had little laminated prayers kind of strewn throughout it, and a turning windmill. And I remember, that was really a very kind of spiritual space for me. It was very important.
Everett used to laminate biblical verses and staple them up with a staple gun all around the property. And so you would be wandering and there would be a tree with a verse that it had reminded him of. And everything was gematria built, and things were 18 paces long, and every single object and natural feature of that land was embedded with a kind of spirituality. And still now we come across objects and items that I had not realized had been marked up in these particular ways. But the treehouse was a particularly beautiful instance of it, directed on an exact north, south, east, west axis, and all the other things you can imagine if you were Everett Gendler building a treehouse for your 5 grandchildren, which is what he was.
I think to kind of wrap things up a little bit, I have a question for Mary and Tamar that I would also love Hannah's input in, even though it might seem less natural. But what do you two hope for Hannah and me and the rest of our generation of Jewish women?
Why don't you go first?
So it's interesting. The question of where struggle is helpful in defining identity is, I think, a really deep one. There is this sense that what we seek is an easy path, and I think almost all of us find it difficult to be engaged without a certain amount of friction, but also difficult to remain engaged in the frictional state without a place of repose. And I guess what I would hope for Hannah is the appropriate balance, and for you as well, Natalie, and for all of you here who are a generation younger than I am, the opportunity both to have spaces of repose where you are in a position fully to recover from the world, a sort of emotional Shabbat-like dissociation from the rough and tumble of what reality is. And then the opportunity, which I think is the most fulfilling in life, of really feeling like in this world of imperfection, there are challenges which were brought before your generation, and it is your chance to participate in moving things along whatever the set of questions that confronts your generation might be. And we had 3 really, really different sets of questions, and all of us have had, I think, the combination of a space of repose and the opportunity to build.
I leave it to my daughter.
Hannah, anything to add?
I think we're gonna let Tamar have the last word.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
I think I'll hand it off to Rachel now. Wow, I feel like we just need one more round of applause.
I just need to say one thing. I couldn't remember the word covenant, and now I've remembered it. And that's what I was talking about, male being part of the covenant.
Yes.
Don't get old and don't